dveshau vyavasthitao tayorna vasham agachet tau hi yasya paripamsanam. These are principles to regulate attachment and aversion pertaining to the senses and their objects. One should not come under the control of such attachment and aversion because they are stumbling blocks on the path of self-realization. So, here Arjuna is asking, what is it that impels a person to act in ways that maybe are not even allowed? Let's sing the verse. Arjuna uvacha atha kena prayukto yam papam chariti purushah anichcham api varshneya balad iva niyojitah atha kena prayukto yam papam charati purushah anichchannapi varshneya baladiva niyojitah atha kena prayukto yam papam charati purushah anichchannapi varshneya baladiva niyojitah. Atha kena prayukto yam purushah atha kena prayukto yam papam charati purushah anichchannapi varshneya baladiva niyojitah. Atha kena prayukto yam papam charati purushah anichchannapi varshneya baladiva niyojitah. Arjuna vacha atha kena prayukto yam papam charati purushah anichchannapi varshneya baladiva niyojitah. Atha kena prayukto yam papam charati purushah anichchannapi varshneya baladiva niyojitah. Arjuna vacha, Arjuna said, Atha, then, kena, by what? Prayuktaha, impelled, ayam, one, papam, sins, charati, does, purushaha, a man, anichchanna, without desiring, api, although, varshneya, O descendant of Vrishni, balat, by force, iva, as if, niyojitaha, engaged. Translation. Arjuna said, O descendant of Vrishni, by what is one impelled to sinful acts, even unwillingly, as if engaged by force? Please repeat. Arjuna said, O descendant of Vrishni, by what is one impelled to sinful acts, even unwillingly, as if engaged by force? Purport. A living entity, as part and parcel of the Supreme, is originally spiritual, pure, and free from all material contaminations. Therefore, by nature, he is not subject to the sins of the material world. But when he is in contact with the material nature, he acts in many sinful ways, without hesitation, and sometimes even against his will. As such, Arjuna's question to Krishna is very sanguine as to the perverted nature of the living entities. Although the living entity sometimes does not want to act in sin, he is still forced to act. Sinful actions are not, however, impelled by the supersoul within, but are due to another cause, as the Lord explains in the next verse. Arjuna uvachak atha kena prayuktoyam papam chariti purushaha anichannapi varashneya balariva niyojitaha. Arjuna said, O descendant of Vrishni, by what is one impelled to sinful acts, even unwillingly, as if engaged by force? As I mentioned, this is referring back to text 34, in which Krishna was talking about basically two things: attachment and aversion. Attachment arises when our senses are in contact with things that please the senses. And aversion arises when our senses are in contact with things that do not please the senses. So attachment and aversion, these are the two things that are being referred to here. Now it seems a little strange on the face of it, because after mentioning that, Krishna somehow or other throws in this verse about prescribed duty that doesn't seem to fit at all in the context or in the flow of the discussion. It's better to perform one's own prescribed duties, even though faulty, than to do another's duties perfectly. Destruction in the course of performing one's own duty is better than engaging in another's duties, or following another's path is dangerous. And that's the end of it. He doesn't go on to explain what that has to do with this topic of attachment and aversion, until Arjuna kind of abruptly asks him, well, you know, it's almost as if this was a lot for Arjuna to digest all at once. He's trying to take it in, and as a good student, he's asking the question that he needs to ask. What is it that forces us to do things even when we know that they're wrong, and even when we don't really want to do them, we feel impelled to do things? So this is an age-old question. What is it that actually impels us to act at all? So Madhvacharya in his commentary says, Bahava karma karanaha santi. There are many causes of action. Many things cause action. And krodhadayaha kamascha. There is things beginning with anger, and then there's kama, which means desire. Tatra ko balavan iti prichhati atheti. In this verse, beginning atha, he's asking Krishna, out of these, which one is the strongest thing? This is a good question. So he says, he reminds us also that this question is impelled by Krishna's statement in text 34. Tayor navashamagachet iti prashna prapakam. This is the thing that actually impels the question, or prompts the question. Tayor navashamagachet. What does that mean? It means one should not come under the control of these two things. What two things? Attachment and aversion. Raga and dvesha. These are the two things. So that's a very important, this is so deep. These 3, 4, 5 verses here are really so deep. It's hard to get into really a lot of detail about it. But the idea is that attachment, the senses naturally become attached to things that please them. The senses are called go. I have a cow living outside of my house. Her name is Saraswati. Those of you who reside in the MVT complex, you already know who Saraswati is. She's the local cow. And this morning, sometimes when I come out of the house, I look to see where is Saraswati. And quite often, Saraswati is already looking at me, the way they do, with expectant eyes. So this morning, I think it was this morning. Anyway, recently, I took a bag full of vegetable peelings and gratified her senses with those things. So practically before I could even get to where she was supposed to eat, she was coming after the bag and ready to eat the whole thing, plastic and all. That's what they do. Therefore you see that all over Vrindavan, Gomata bachao polythene hatao. We have to be careful what we do with these bags. It's an interesting continuum here. Since time immemorial here in Vrindavan, people have been using palasha plates made out of leaves. So when you finish with it, you chuck it over the wall. And in 6 months it's gone. It's deteriorated. It's biodegradable. Now that we've made the transformation to a more advanced culture, unsustainable culture, if that's more advanced, that we just replace the donas with bags. And the bags are choking the cows, and the bags are choking the Yamuna, and the bags are choking even our sewers, and it's a problem. It's a problem. But I don't want to get too much off track with that. But anyway, so I brought this cow this nice things that cows like to eat, vegetable peels and watermelon rinds and other things. She was immediately attracted to them. That's the attachment. That's called raga. She had a taste for it. Our senses are no different than the cow senses. Therefore, they're also called cows. There's a nice verse from Mangal Thakur where he says, "My dear Lord, please herd all my cows into your pasture also." I mean, who can imagine that the person whose name is Gopala would ever lose control of some cows? He's Gopala. He's the protector of the cows, so please protect my senses. Keep them engaged in your pasture. Nice verse. So our senses are called Go, and they like certain things and they don't like other things. That's natural. This comes from Prakriti. So the question might be raised, especially with regard to the regulative principles, they've already been mentioned here, that, if everything is impelled by Prakriti in this way, attachment and aversion, then what is the need for regulative principles? Actually, if you give a careful reading to Srila Prabhupada's purport to text 34, you'll see that he addresses this. Excuse me, because he's following in the commentary of Sridhar Swami and Baladev Vidyabhushan and other Vaishnava acharyas. In fact, most of the time you will see that whatever our Vaishnava acharyas are saying, Gaudiya Vaishnava acharyas are saying, they actually get it from Sridhar Swami. He's that prominent in our line. Most of the teachings of Krishna consciousness, as we call it, they're coming from Sridhar Swami. So that's the case here as well. Somebody might question the need for regulative principles. The need for the regulative principles that you have all these cows, and they are attracted to certain things. You've got to somehow or other rein them in. They are repulsed by certain things. This impels us to act. This attachment and this aversion impels us to act. Now Madhvacharya explains. This is the implication of the idea that tayor navashamagachet. You should not come under the control of attachment and aversion. You should instead, come under the control of Krishna. Now, in the next verse, we're of course given the answer to Arjuna's question. What is it that impels us by force? Because there are many factors that can impel us to action, Madhvacharya has said. Anger could be one of them, pride, envy, right? There's so many things. Desire, of course, we know, and generally, of course, superlative desire in this material world, kama, we usually translate as lust. So these are the things. These are the attachments that our senses are latched onto right now. So Krishna answers in the next verse, Kama esha, krodha esha, rajoguna samadbhavaha, mahashano, mahapatma vidhin enam iha vairinam. Very strong words he's using. First of all, he says, Kama esha, krodha esha. Now, in Sanskrit grammar, when you have a pronoun and a noun joined in the same case, this is called prathama vibhakti, nominative case, and singular. It means that they're identified with one another. They're basically one and the same thing. Krishna is not making any distinction here between these two. So one might get the impression that kama and krodha are the same thing. Madhvacharya does not believe this. He addresses this in his own purport. What does he say here? Well, he says, Yastu balavan pravartaka sa esha kamaha. The thing that is the most strong, that's kama. That's his answer to the question in a nutshell. Krodhopyesha eva. And this thing is only krodha. He says. Even though it's only krodha, nothing but krodha, tajanyatvat, on account of being generated from lust, kamat krodho abhijayate iti yuktam. We've already heard that, right? From lust comes anger. Krishna has already stated this. So, yatrapi guru nindadi nimitta krodha tatrapi Bhakti nimitta aninda kama nimitta eva. When one hears the criticism of one's spiritual master, for example, then this is a cause for anger, because we naturally have love and respect and devotion for the spiritual master. So to hear any harsh words is going to be very painful. And out of a desire, kama, to not hear ninda, blasphemy, or criticism, as the case may be. It seems to work in both directions. Either the Guru is criticizing you, which we don't like to hear because we have such great respect for the spiritual master, or someone else is criticizing the spiritual master, which is even worse. But in either case, we have strong attachment, we have bhakti. Therefore, this is the cause of anger. And in fact, the Shastra even gives us this vidhi, the injunction that you have to defend the spiritual master if he's under attack by anyone. Of course, a disciple doesn't have to defend himself if the spiritual master is criticizing him, because that is not the duty of a disciple, but to criticize the disciple is the duty of the spiritual master. Anyway, so the idea here is that now he's going on to explain what is the distinction that he's making. Ye tvanyatavadanti te sankarana sukshmam jananti. Those who say that these two are actually not different, they don't understand the very subtle connection between them. This is the point. Because they're very closely related. One follows almost imperceptibly from the other one. As soon as your desire is frustrated, the anger is immediate. It's very quick like that. So because of these, what we call sankara, or connection, intermingling of the two, then it becomes the cause of anger. Uktam cha, he's also quoting a verse here. Rade kamam nakopadyat jayantehi katanchana. Anyway, the next point that's important, he says mahashana. He's explaining the word mahashana in this verse. Mahashana, what does the literally, anybody want to look in the word for word synonyms here?
Holy
Huh? All devouring, yeah. It eats. He's a great eater. So lust is like that, and he explains why. He says, Mahashana Mahadhi Kama Bhogyam, because there are so many things that are enjoyable, so many things that are pleasing to the senses. Therefore, he's the great all-devouring agent in this world. And why is he a sinful enemy? What does he say? All-devouring sinful enemy. The next word is Mahapatma, greatly sinful. Madhvacharya explains this here. Mahabrahma hatyadi karanatvat Mahapatma. He's called greatly sinful because of being the cause for all kinds of great sins, such as killing a Brahmana. In the Dharma Shastra, we have different categories of sins. There are some, just like in Catholic, those who are from the Roman Catholic background, you have, cardinal sins and venial sins. Means, some sins that are they're not that heavy, but then the other sins are very, very heavy. Similarly, in the Vedic literature, we have Mahapataka. That's the most sinful thing. It's very, very difficult to overcome the reactions of Mahapataka sins. At least through the process of karma kanda and ritualism. It's very, very difficult. So all those sins are actually impelled only by one thing, which is kama, desire. And desire is impelled by either attachment or by aversion. This is the connection here. And then he says, Sarva Purushartha Virodhitvat Vairi. Why do we say he's an enemy of this world? Why is lust an enemy of the world? Who can say? He eats everything because, practically speaking, everything is consumed by lust in this material world. Everything that we enjoy is driven by lust, desire, generally. And it's very sinful because it is the cause of so much problem when we do not control our attachments or our aversions. It causes so much problem. And therefore it's an enemy. Enemy meaning here, Sarva Purushartha Virodhitvat. He is the one who opposes all human attainments. Sarva Purushartha. And generally we have Chatu Purusharthas, right? Does anybody know what the 4 human attainments are, according to Vedic literatures? Dharma, Artha, Kama, and Moksha. You're allowed your Kama, but it's got to be reined in. Just like you can have a cow, but you've got to keep the cow on a rope. Otherwise it causes problems. The senses are like animals. We've been hearing in the Bhagavatam recently, the mind. The mind is the guru of all the senses. That means that the mind is actually the worst one of all the senses. And the first one of all the senses to be controlled, the mind. So we have to control the mind. If you can successfully control the mind, then the other senses will naturally follow, because they're subordinate to the mind. This is the important point. So, Dharma, Artha, Kama, and Moksha, we are engaged in Dharma if we are human beings. The distinguishing property that defines a human being is this adherence to Dharma. It is not a biological phenomenon alone. It's not just because both of your parents, hopefully, are human, that therefore you are also a human being by default. Just like when you take birth in a Brahmin family but do not have the gunas. It's not automatic. You are a human being in fact only when you abide by Dharma. And Dharma means activity that will elevate you. If you do not want spiritual liberation or do not want love of Godhead, then at least you're going up, or at least you're not going down. That's the baseline qualification for being a human being. You have to be dharmic. Naturally, as a result of dharmic existence, artha is generated. You get increased facility. or your facility is retained. As Krishna says elsewhere in Bhagavad Gita also. What is that? Yoga Kshemam Vahamiyaham. So, then generally what people will do is, the first thing that we'll think of is karma. Okay, what am I going to do with all this? I've been good, I've got some facility, maybe they respect me and everything's okay now, so let me take advantage of it for fulfilling my desires. That is the general tendency, especially of the conditioned soul. A really advanced person who's very thoughtful and planning for the future, this is called strategic thinking. Strategic planning for the next life, that person also thinks about liberation. Now the teaching of Chaitanya Mahaprabhu is so august and so glorious and so profound that it goes beyond all four of these things. Pancham Purushartha, our acharyas call it. It is the fifth goal of life, which is the real goal of life. Beyond mere liberation means you just clean your slate and you do not become sullied again by mundane attachments and aversions. It's a via negativa sort of, it's an existence of stasis, artificial stasis. Just like when children are nonsense, okay, time out, stand in the corner now, 10 minutes, you can't do anything, just stand there. This is called mukti. And you know, people are so envious generally in this world that that's as much as they can handle. You can't give them any more than that. They won't take it because of envy only. This is the problem. So Chaitanya Mahaprabhu says, once you get dharma is okay. Not a good idea to discourage dharma in this age because there's so little of it. Now, I'd like to point out for your attention here. In his purport here to text 36, twice, Srila Prabhupada indicates something in a very subtle way by his deliberate choice of words. Do not ever think that Prabhupada did not choose his words very deliberately. He told us this. He did. Rather, on at least one occasion, Prabhupada even went so far as to say that he didn't choose his words at all. Krishna chose his words. So Krishna, speaking through his divine grace in the form of Srila Prabhupada, said, describing the conditioned soul, when in contact with the material nature, he acts in many sinful ways without hesitation, and sometimes even against his will. Why only sometimes? Prabhupada is quite aware of the general tenor of this day and age. By default, you are going to be carried down if you do nothing to swim against the current. You will be, as he said this morning, if you listen to the class, you will be killed by the mind. You will be killed. It's definite. There are many places that Prabhupada said this. Since we're talking about lust today, there's a nice purport in the famous passages of the 7th canto of the Srimad Bhagavatam, Shravanam Kirtanam Vishnu Ityadi, that verse we all know, describing the 9 processes of devotional service. In his purport, very lengthy purport, one of the longest purports in the entire body of Srila Prabhupada's writings, he's talking about deity worship. And he says that the path of deity worship is especially recommended for the householders. Why is that? Because the householders have to deal with, not only are they dealing with the opposite sex, the other ashrams don't have to do that, right? And in 2 of them at least, it's forbidden to do that. But they, in addition to dealing with the opposite sex, which is always very tenuous and dangerous in fact, they're also the most directly interacting with the material energy generally. And because of their engagement all day long, generally, in very grubby affairs, involving money and traffic and so many mundane concerns, the consciousness will be brought down. The consciousness will be brought down, as we've already mentioned. So he says there he goes on to say that for the householder especially, the path of deity worship is recommended, and he goes so far as to say that unless a householder engages in deity worship, His fall down is positively assured. End quote. His quote, fall down is positively assured, end quote. Taken directly out of the 7th canto. So this is our situation, and particularly with regard to this verse, we've got to be very careful. Now, the next thing he says is that as such, Arjuna's question to Krishna is very sanguine. We don't know what the word sanguine means. Raise your hand if you know the word sanguine, and what does it mean? Okay, it means a few things, but in the sense that Prabhupada is using it, it means very feasible, very positive, very good. A good proposal.
Relevant.
Sorry?
Relevant. Relevant.
Not exactly relevant, but favorable, I would say. You know, rosy is maybe a good way to put it, because it also means blood red. Anyway, so Arjuna's question to Krishna is very good. And as to the perverted nature of the living entities, this is another strong word. It's another, it's one of the characteristic words in Srila Prabhupada's jargon. He's all talking about the perverted consciousness. Perverted. We're all perverts. It's a very strong word, isn't it? Think about it. Criminal. We have a criminal mentality. Generally we think abusers. An abuser is a pervert, right? These people who go and abuse children, especially sexual abuse. It's considered to be perverted, right? And Prabhupada is saying that the conditioned soul is perverted. Our consciousness, the pure consciousness that he opens his purport describing, spiritual, pure, and freed from material contaminations, this becomes perverted. And it becomes perverted on account of only one thing, envy. Therefore Madhva said, Bahava karma karanani santi. There are many things. Envy is another, it's a bona fide cause for material activity. But he goes on to say here, although the living entity sometimes does not want to act in sin. Is this just coincidence? This is the second time he's used the word sometimes. Sometimes we don't want to commit sinful activity. Most of the time we do. This is the problem. Our culture is such that this is the default. And people aren't even aware of it. If you are determined enough, like the Indians nowadays, it seems, they're so eager. If they don't go over to America in this life, then they're certainly cultivating the prerequisite consciousness to take birth there. Aisa lagta hai, no? So, therefore you will get what you want. This is the way it works. Certainly, according to what you desire. There's a funny story that a god brother told me. There was one poor villager. Maybe we can say he was here in UP. And he'd heard everything about America that you hear through the Indian media, which is grossly exaggerated, inaccurate, and misleading, actually pernicious. So he cultivated naturally, as a sangat sanjayate kama. As a result of his association, he decided, I want to take my next birth in America. So he went to a Jyotish. He said, tell me my future, I want to take birth in America. And the man looked at his chart and he was, zarur, yes, you definitely, I think it looks like you will be born in America. So he said, tell me more. He said, yes, you will be born in Beverly Hills. Beverly Hills, in case you don't know, is one of the most affluent parts of Los Angeles. Generally the actors and the Hollywood people live there. It's a wealthy area, especially Bel Air. So you'll take birth in Beverly Hills. Everywhere you go, you will be driven by a chauffeur. You will have as much as you want to eat. Nobody will bother you, no enemies. All the pretty young girls will be surrounding you and appreciating how nice you are, and sometimes they even want to take you home with them. And he's getting more and more excited the more he's hearing this because of Kama Esha, right? So he says, so all these things and more, you will live in a palatial mansion, you'll have no problems, AC environment, totally artificial, you will never have to interact with the real world. So he said, because you're going to take your next birth in Beverly Hills as a toy poodle. If you've ever been to Beverly Hills, I was born there, so I know. All up and down Rodeo Drive, the main shopping area there, you see young women carrying little tiny poodles in their purse even. This is what the future of this poor villager was, because he didn't know how it really works. As Krishna says in chapter 15, just as the air is carrying aromas, we latch on to some sort of worldview or some desire, and it takes us into some other, and we don't really know the downside of it. We don't consider, because the intelligence is colored by lust and bewildered thereby. And he goes on to say this actually in the coming verses. I don't want to ruin the plot, but dhumena vriyate vahnir yatha darsham alenacha yathol benavrado garbhas tatha tenedam avratam. Just as dust will cover the mirror and you can't see a pure reflection, at least not clearly. Just as the smoke will cover a fire, and just as the womb itself completely covers the embryo. These are three examples given to illustrate the coverings respectively of Sattva Guna, Rajoguna, and Tamoguna. He said in this way the consciousness of the living entity becomes covered by different degrees of this lust. So now Sridhar Swami, I think it was, said regarding today's verse, the text 37, that he mentions specifically Rajoguna Samudbhava. Why Rajoguna? Kama Esha Krodha Esha. Rajoguna Samudbhava. This not only indicates that Kama is the source of Krodha, because everybody knows Krodha is not Rajaguna, it's Tamoguna. But it also indicates that if we cultivate things that are not Rajasic or lower than Rajasic, then we can become freed from these enemies. We can overcome our attachments and our aversions. We can come out of Tamoguna, we can come out of Rajoguna. Therefore the Shastric vidhis and nishedhas, that is to say the injunctions and the prohibitions, the do's and the don'ts, they always encourage us to cultivate more sattva guna. This is the important thing. In the 11th canto there's a famous verse that describes this. As long as we have not uncovered our original spiritual pristine Krishna consciousness, in which we have an undying, akshaya ruchi, a non-diminishing taste for hearing about Vasudeva, Krishna, then we have to very carefully follow the injunctions of the Shastras in such a way that we cultivate sattva guna and are elevated. Because urdhvam gachanti sattvastha. If we are in sattva guna, we're elevated. If we're in rajoguna, then what kind of progress do we get? They like to talk about pragati, right? Delhi mein you have pragati maidan, progress. So what kind of progress do you get in rajoguna? Horizontal only. You're going around, it's like you're switching positions in the mud puddle of material existence, but you're not actually getting out. Sattvaguna at least takes you out. Rajaguna, you're moving sideways. Tamoguna, you're going down. That's the problem. So Tamoguna is the worst fear. Of many, many things that we could say about the previous verse in which Krishna mentioned Paradharmo Bhayavaha, that's what he's talking about. At least you should not lose your grip on Rajoguna. If that's the best you can do in this human form of life, do not go down into Tamoguna. If you cannot elevate the consciousness to Sattvaguna, what to do? Actually, Madhvacharya quotes a nice verse here in regards to text 34. It's pretty scary actually. Samskaro balavan eva brahmadya api tadvashaha tathapi sonyatha kartum shakyate ati prayatnataha. That is to say, it's a kind of a preliminary answer to Arjuna's question. Before Arjuna asked the question, he's answering the question. The samskar, That is to say, the mindset that you have developed through past associations and activities in this material world. The psychology that you have gradually formed over the course of how many lifetimes we can't say. That is called samskar, and that is what drives you. That is the single most powerful entity that impels you to act. Samskara. Therefore we find that even though a person is trying to control the senses, even though a person knows the right thing to do from the wrong thing to do, still sometimes he's impelled to do the wrong thing. Because it's visceral. It's not in the intelligence. It's deeply rooted in this psychology that we have, the false ego. It's almost like, athletes have this concept they call muscle memory. If a person is missing a limb, but he still has the sense of using that limb in a kind of a subtle psychological way, that is samskar. And this is the powerful agent, at least according to Madhvacharya says. Even Brahma and other gods lesser than Brahma, they're under its control. Samskara. You cannot, what is that? Mayame tantarantite, Krishna says, elsewhere in the Gita. In this, once we fall into this material energy and become covered by her prakshepaatmika and sankshepaatmika and avaranatmika shaktis, it's very, very, almost impossible to get out of it. But, tatapi, even though that's the case, sonyata kartham shakyate ati prayatnataha. It's kind of like when Arjuna asked Krishna, how do I control the mind, which is like controlling the wind? What was Krishna's answer? It is possible by constant practice and detachment. It's not easy to change the samskaras, but it is possible. Now there's a story in this regard, and then I'm going to stop. In the old days, there used to be that people would come to the holy place and take a bath in the holy river. Nowadays you cannot approach the holy river because it will give you cancer, or worse, many diseases you will get. The Yamuna for at least 20 years now has been 20 times the legal limit of pollution allowed. Even the head priest of Radharaman temple does not go to bathe in the Yamuna anymore, despite the fact that his ancestors have done this for centuries. They bathe Radharaman with Bisledi pani, or maybe catch water, I hope. But you understand the situation. So, at one such place, there was an old tiger. The tiger, tigers kill people. They eat people. Man-eaters. So the tiger became old and was unable to hunt anymore. So he thought, I've got to figure out something now. What am I going to do? So the tiger stationed himself at the far edge of one of these tirthas on the bathing cot. And whenever any pilgrims would come, he would say, please come and bathe here and I will give you tilak. And after your bath they put this tika on your forehead and they make sure you're all ritually set. This is from the days when people used to care about those things because they were human beings rather than animals by default. But, so nobody's going to trust a tiger, so as a special enticement, especially here in the Indian subcontinent, he would offer them some gold. Indians have more gold than anyone else in the world. And it's well known that Indians like gold more than any other people on the face of the earth, it would seem. At least these are the statistics that they publish in sources such as British Broadcasting Company and other. So the tiger was saying, please come bathe here, I will take care of you and you can have this gold. So nobody's going to trust a tiger. Finally somebody came and said, okay, tell me, why should I place my faith in you? After all, you're a tiger. And he said, no. He said, I've taken sannyas. And you can see I'm old. And I have, somehow I've had a turn of heart. I've realized that, my whole lifetime I've been killing and eating people. And I've studied all the Dharma Shastras. And I've decided that to atone for all my previous sinful activities, I'm now going to serve pilgrims selflessly and give in charity also. And so one day a person was foolish enough to come and place his trust in this tiger. So he got his gold chain for sure, and he went to take his bath. When he got his bath, he noticed that he was stuck in the sand. There was quicksand there. Because the person was stuck, the tiger could easily make a meal of him and didn't even have to work very hard, because he didn't have any more strength. He was an old tiger. Therefore, the moral of the story is it doesn't matter how many shastras you've studied. It doesn't matter what you're trying to do to change your samskar. The thing that is going to stand out, no matter what you do, is your samskar. It's discouraging, isn't it? Very. But let us understand one thing about this process. We're not talking about karma kanda reformation here, because karma kanda reformation is not reformation. It does not change the heart. It does not root out the attachment and aversion, the raga dvesha that Krishna is mentioning here. It leaves that what do you want to say? It's kind of like when you take your antibiotics and don't run the whole course. The germ is still there, and as soon as you stop taking the pills, it comes back with a vengeance. You see? So simply atonement and rituals and these kinds of things, they will not purify the heart, therefore they cannot elevate you spiritually. And they don't reform your character because they cannot change your samskara. But Bhakti Yoga is so powerful, and the holy name of Krishna, especially in this Kali Yuga, we chant the Mahamantra, Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare. How many references are there in the Shastra? Iti Shorashakam Namnam Kali Kalmashan Ashanam Nata Parotaropayo Sarva Vedeshu Drishyate. If you look throughout all the Vedas, you will not find a more powerful means of elevation, purification, spiritual realization, God realization ultimately, than this simple process of chanting Hare Krishna Mahamantra. So this is the great mercy of Chaitanya Mahaprabhu, that in this age, when nobody has any good samskars at all, we don't really have to. As long as we hold on to these principles, 4 regulative principles that Prabhupada gave us, that have been discussed in the previous verses, and we chant this Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare, Mahamantra, then that will actually purify us. Prayatnataha, to use this verse that Madhva is quoting here. If you endeavor, you have to ask. You cannot parrot-like chanting will not work. You have to invest your feelings. You have to invest your heart. You have to invest your sincerity and your volition in actually applying this process in the proper association, in the proper way. All these details, the specifics of this application, they've been given in the literature of our great acharyas, such as Rupa Goswami. Upadeshamrita is a very good example. We were hearing that Gopal Krishna Maharaj the other day was saying, what you have to do in the beginning, you control your senses, you follow these processes, and in good association, you give up the bad, ityadi. So, I'm not going to read the purport for text 37. We read the other one already. I think someone else is going to continue on text 37. And there's many other things that can be said about this. I've really only limited my talk tonight to the commentaries of Madhvacharya and Sridhar Swami, because most of the others are basing on those, especially Sridhar Swami. So I'll stop here, but if anybody has any questions or comments, I'll try to answer them.